In the golden cage of suburban opulence, where manicured lawns mask the quiet desperation for relevance, a certain silence speaks louder than opulence. The sun painted a soft gold hue over the marble steps of a mansion that had hosted governors, tycoons, and discreet scandals. Inside, Eleanor Moreau, heiress to a fortune carved from old oil money, sipped chilled rosewater and waited for a delivery. Eleanor was the portrait of inherited confidence. Her designer loungewear, custom-stitched in Milan, clung to her frame, like silk armor, yet beneath her poise lingered something brittle, an unease that clung to privilege like perfume. When the doorbell echoed, she stood, graceful and expectant. Her world was about to ripple. Outside stood a teenage boy, thin, neatly dressed, holding a plain brown parcel. He was black. He wore a name tag from a boutique courier service known for confidentiality. His eyes were courteous, his stance respectful, yet the weight of 1,000 stereotypes fell upon him before he could utter a word. Eleanor froze. Her gaze scanned the boy, not for threats, but for confirmations of the narratives she had long absorbed. Her mind, trained by whispered warnings, and daily media doses sparked like flint to fear. She didn't ask his name, she didn't open the door, she simply retreated and picked up the phone. Hello, yes, there's a suspicious person at my door. No, I'm not comfortable engaging. Please send someone now. No questions, no dialogue, just assumptions weaponized. The boy, Marcus, had been here before, not to this address, but to this moment, the moment where innocence meets assumption. He felt the cold spike of adrenaline, a pulse of ancient generational fear. Still, he stayed. He had been trained for discretion, not confrontation. His guardian had told him, "You are never just you. You are every story they've been told." As sirens began to whisper from afar, the temperature in the neighborhood dropped perceptibly. Curtains parted. Faces leaned against glass. Phones captured shadows behind blinds. Eleanor stood by the door, rehearsing her indignation. She was certain of her righteousness, until a vehicle arrived that didn't belong. It was a car that didn't make sound. It devoured the road with understated elegance. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom with no license plate, just an emblem that only insiders could read, a signal of wealth so deep it required no explanation. The driver stepped out first, a man in grey, expressionless, who opened the door with mechanical reverence. From the shadows emerged Alim Khalid, known in whispers as the Baron of Silk and Smoke. Alim's fortune came not from oil, but from influence. Arabian royalty by blood, with power veins stretching through Geneva, Dubai, and Shanghai. He was both myth and menace. His entrance was silent. His presence wasn't. He approached slowly, his eyes never leaving Eleanor. She faltered, the phone still in her hand, her breath hitching. Marcus's face shifted, not in fear but in relief. The boy walked toward Alim with the confidence of someone who belonged. Eleanor's mind spiraled. This was no charity case. This wasn't a delivery boy. This was someone's son, someone powerful, someone untouchable. "Good afternoon, Alim," said, voice as smooth as storm clouds. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." His words were polite, but his tone left no room for pretense. Behind him, a second vehicle pulled up. Not police. Not now. A security unit, private, elite, armed with credentials that outranked the city's own. They didn't ask questions. They waited for Alim's command. Eleanor tried to speak, but shame had welded her lips shut. Her fortress had become her cell. Alim looked at her and then at the house. "Nice walls," he murmured, "but you should be careful about the gates you open. You never know who's already inside." The crowd behind curtains held their breath. Marcus stood taller, not because he was defended, but because he had been seen. Then Alim turned to him. "Come, you've done well." As they walked away, Eleanor's phone buzzed. An anonymous message, short and devastating. "The favor you owe me is now paid in full." Her knees buckled. That one call, so casual, so confident, wasn't just about racism. It was about power, about debts buried in crystal deals and offshore accounts. She had forgotten she once borrowed influence from someone she could never repay. Now, her illusion of control had collapsed under the weight of a truth she could no longer ignore. In the comments, share your thoughts. Have you ever seen power shift so fast? Can privilege blind us to the truth standing right in front of us? Let your voice be heard. Your story matters. Share it below, and let the world know that the real kings and queens don't always wear crowns. The neighborhood didn't sleep that night. The luxury lights stayed on. Gossip flared in encrypted group chats. Security systems were reprogrammed. But in the Moreau estate, silence reigned like a sentence. Eleanor, once the matriarch of Manicured, dominance now walked her halls like a ghost, haunted not by violence but by visibility. Her fear hadn't been about danger, it had been about exposure. She had mistaken a young boy's silence for menace, and in return summoned a storm she could never contain. But the story didn't end with a retreat. Alim Khalid did not believe in mere confrontation. He believed in correction. Not public, not brutal, but absolute. The morning after the encounter, Eleanor received a package. No sender, no courier, just a lacquered black envelope sealed with gold wax. Inside, a single card, thick as vellum, engraved in ornate calligraphy. A debt acknowledged is a debt repaid. Consider this your first lesson in humility. AK attached was a deed. To her astonishment, it was for land, her land. The deed outlined a forgotten parcel, a tract her grandfather had traded years ago, buried under layers of trust funds and offshore holdings. She hadn't even remembered it. But Alim had, and now he owned it. More than that, the land in question intersected with the only access road to her property. Her home, her kingdom, was now a fortress without a gate. The retaliation had begun. But it wasn't just legal, it was social. Within days, Eleanor found herself quietly excluded. Galas suddenly capped their guest lists. Her husband's business partner cancelled a merger with vague apologies. A silent, invisible noose of elite society began to tighten. Alim hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't threatened anyone. He had simply moved, strategically, surgically. Behind the scenes, power whispered, "This is what happens when you treat royalty like staff." Meanwhile, Marcus's world shifted too. At first, he didn't understand the magnitude of what had happened. But at school, his name was suddenly met with a strange kind of reverence. Teachers offered opportunities they had never mentioned before. Students whispered, stared, and stepped aside. He wasn't sure if it was fear or fascination, but he no longer felt small. At home, Alim sat with him in the study. "You were calm," he said, "even when your dignity was questioned. That's the hardest skill to master." Marcus frowned. "Why didn't you do more? Why not punish her?" Alim's expression didn't change. "Do you think she hasn't been punished?" He poured tea from a silver pot that dated back 3 generations. "Power is not in how loud you scream, Marcus. It's in how softly you speak, and still the walls crumble." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding not just the lesson, but the legacy. Alim continued, "You see, retaliation is not about revenge. It's about remembering. It's about making sure the next boy who rings a doorbell doesn't have to prove he belongs. That is the true currency of power. Word of the incident never made the news. Not officially. But in backrooms, boardrooms, and luxury lounges, the tale was passed like legend. The heiress who dared call the police on the wrong boy, and the Arabian baron who rewrote her reality with a whisper. No lawsuits, no social media outburst. Just reputation realigned. Weeks later, Eleanor hosted a charity event, her first in months. Attendance was half its usual size. The guests were polite but distant, conversations deflected, smiles were tight. She gave her speech with shaky charm, trying to recapture the control she once wielded. Then came the auction. Item number 4. A private dinner with Eleanor Moreau. No bids, not one. She stood frozen, smiling through humiliation, while the silence screamed. Later that night, another envelope arrived. This one bore no seal, just a photo. Marcus, standing at a gala, dressed in tailored velvet, shaking hands with a foreign dignitary. His smile was effortless, his presence regal. And behind him, slightly in the background, Alim Khalid stood like a shadow made of empire. The message was clear. The future had already moved on, and Eleanor, she was no longer part of the narrative. She had been replaced. Now tell us, was the response too subtle, or was it the perfect checkmate? Do true power moves happen in silence? Comment your thoughts below and share this story with someone who needs to remember. Legacy always watches, and respect must be earned. In a world sculpted by legacy and layered with silent hierarchies, we often forget one brutal truth. Appearances deceive, but power never hides. What began as a simple delivery spiraled into a reckoning, not just for a wealthy woman caught in her own prejudice, but for everyone watching from behind glass walls, convinced they were untouchable. This wasn't a story about a boy and a mistake. It was a warning, a reminder that the real kings don't need thrones. They move in silence. They strike without fury, and they change destinies without raising their voice. Eleanor's fall wasn't sudden, it was surgical, and that is how power reclaims balance in a world drunk on entitlement. But now we ask you, have you ever seen a moment when status was shattered by presence alone? Have you ever witnessed someone underestimated, only to rise and rewrite every rule in the room? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. Speak your truth, because when we share stories like these, we don't just expose injustice. We remind the world that respect isn't inherited, it's enforced. Comment below, share this video. Let others witness how legacy responds when provoked. And remember, never mistake silence for surrender. The real empire always watches.